Okay, greetings everyone. I hope everybody enjoyed the film and it was very instructional and informational and heartwarming. I'm honored to have three sisters here to talk about midwifery and the traditions of African midwifery, and I'm going to introduce them real briefly. First one, immediately to my left, is Salaamah Abdullah, and she's been a midwife for 40 years and has caught over 4,000 babies in homes, hospitals, birth centers in 10 states and 2 African countries. She was the clinical director in Senegal for 2 years, board member of Midwives Alliance of North America. Sister Abdullah is the first Black woman graduate from Emory University with a master's degree in midwifery. She has an NGO in Ghana and is part of the home birth practice Mandela Midwifery of Atlanta. Next, we have Sarahn Henderson. Sarahn has been a midwife for 37 years and is the lead midwife of Birth Intergenerational, serving families in Georgia. She has delivered over 700 babies, including twins and breeches. Her community service includes conference coordinator for ICTC International Center for Traditional Childbearing and Black Midwives and Healers Conference. Sarahn Henderson is one of the founding members of the Georgia Midwifery Association and currently participating in research and solutions for Georgia's high maternal and infant mortality rates. And all the way on the end is Sekesa Berry of Touch in Love, and she is a lactation consultant, birthing assistant, and doula, an advanced student midwife under the apprenticeship model of training. For over a decade, Sekesa has served the community, and she's currently a board member of Bellies to Babies Foundation and a board member of Families First. And so I wanted to start this discussion. I want to ask each of the sisters, what was the defining moment that caused you to become a midwife? If you can say briefly. Yes, you can start, whoever wants to speak first. It's on.
Okay. My 15-year-old was pregnant, and it brought back memories of the horrible experience I had giving birth to her. And I didn't want to see her turned off to having children. And so it started a search for me, there's got to be another way. There's got to be some other way that you can do this. And so I started catching babies really dumb and lucky. Blessed, really. My goddaughter and my daughter were both pregnant together. So my goddaughter was 19, going on 12. And she got pregnant the first time she had sex, and she was mad at the world, and her mother told her to go to her room and not to come out till she had her baby. So I had 2 pregnant teenagers at my house. Some days it was like I could give them this and I'll move. But they both ended up having their babies at home. All went well. And the third baby that I ended up catching, I wasn't even supposed to be the midwife. I was supposed to be the hand holder and the back rubber, and she had hired some nurse midwives. This was in New York City. This is back in 1979 or So, but it was New Year's Day, the midwives had been out New Year's Eve, and I was catching this baby as they walked in the door. But the baby had a knot in the cord, and it came out and just like laid there, you know. And so I had done CPR, but the timing was so exact that, like, the baby slid out, the midwife stepped in between us, gave him 3 breaths, he kicked over, and he was fine, but scared the shit out of me. It's like, oh, this is not something you learn from a book. This is life and death, and if something happened to somebody that could have been prevented, how would I live with that? So I quit. But then my daughter and goddaughter were both pregnant again, and they didn't want to hear that. It's like, what do you mean you're scared? You weren't scared the last time. I don't want to go to the hospital. So I was like, oh God, oh God, oh God. So anyway, long story short, I sent a 10-page letter to Ina Mae Gaskin on the farm in Tennessee. I have 2 weeks vacation coming up. Can you teach me anything in 2 weeks? And I went there, and I fell in love with the way that they did things. And I was already registered to start nursing school, to start trying to figure out, you know, how I could do this thing. And so I quit my job. I took my pension money. I bought a van. I loaded it up with all the stuff I've been saving because it was too good to throw away. And I wrote them a letter. I said, I'm on my way. I wasn't even smart enough to know I should ask them if I could come, you know? Anyway, that's my story. Next.
My experience came in stages within a few months of each other. My oldest born was born in July, and at that time, my midwife was pregnant, but I don't think anybody knew about it because she wasn't showing. And my husband and I, we operated a natural foods catering service where we made natural sandwiches and cookies, and he was a juice man. He made juices, and we distributed them throughout different stores and restaurants in Atlanta. And it grew to a point where we needed a larger car to distribute, to do our deliveries. And so there was a lady that was in our community who was getting ready to move back to California, where she was from, and she had a Suburban car. That was before Suburbans were hip, you know, and it was perfect for us. And so one evening when I was talking with her, maybe making a payment to her, I was getting ready to walk out the door of the car, and she said, wait a minute. She said, I want you to stay here for a minute. I have something I want to tell you. So I sat down, and for 2 hours she kept me in her car, telling me that she had this vision of me becoming a midwife, and told me the things that I would come to learn in becoming the midwife that I was going to become. And it wasn't going to Georgia State or Emory to get a degree. It was more or less learning the natural laws of science. And so for 2 hours I listened to her, and to this day I haven't seen her, so maybe we're making the last payment with her. But I ran upstairs to my grandmother's house, who we were staying with at the time. She was working through cancer, and so our family came to live with her for a little while. So I ran in the house, and I told my husband and a mutual friend of my midwife that what had happened in this car. And so my friend, she was like, well, let me talk to Nasra and see if she will have you at her birth also. So I was like, okay, whatever. And so the word came back that I could come to her birth. And so I came there also as a hand holder and a massager. And she labored and labored and labored for a long time. And she already had a midwife there to assist her as the midwife role. And so that's what I did. I just massaged her and comforted her the best way that I thought that I could. Anyway, she gave birth to this little baby boy, and It was the most awesome thing that I could see because this baby came out looking like a Smurf and wasn't breathing, and the midwife was frozen from what I recall, and the other ladies that were there, they ran out, and so it was just the three of us, me and Nasra and the midwife, and she said, here, Nasra, you're going to have to talk to your baby because your baby's not responding to me. And so Nasra whispered the Adon into the baby's ears, and the baby went, and that just blew my mind. That was the most awesome thing I had ever seen in my whole life. And so as that evening settled down, I sat down by her bedside, and we were talking about her birth. And she says, you have the hands of a midwife. Let me see your hands. So I gave her my hands, and she looked at my hands, and she rubbed my hands, and she says, I'll train these hands if you would like. So I said, okay. So I came back home that evening. I told my husband and I told my grandmother what she had said, and they gave me their blessings. They were like, well, go on ahead and do it. So I gave birth in July. She had her baby in March. A month later, I get 2 phone calls from 2 women, one who I went to school with here at Clark Atlanta University, and the other one was a woman that I was meeting for the first time, and they both got my number from my midwife. And at the time, she was the only midwife that was serving African-American midwives. There was another woman that was serving anybody in Atlanta, but we're talking about like in the 79 and 80 where there was very few of us. And I was like, why did she give you my number? She's the midwife. And they're like, well, she's just taking her time, you know, healing and recovering from birth, and she gave us your number. And I was like, well, I'm not a midwife. And they were like, we understand, but because you've had the experience of giving birth at home and because you've been to her birth, would you please be there as a support person? And see, back in those days, we're talking about people that were like revolutionary kind of people, people who defined who they were. They were self-determined type of people. They took responsibility for themselves, for their health, for their diet, for their lifestyle. And so I said, okay. So my grandmother told me, she says, well, you must have taken on the calling of your great-great aunt, Alice. And because she was a midwife, and they used to call her the country doctor back in Athens, back in the days, because they took care of everybody, including, you know, delivering babies. And so I went off to the first person's birth and took my son with me, and he was still nursing at the time. I asked him for a bedroom so I can put him to sleep, hoping that maybe she would have the baby while I was putting him to sleep. And then I get a little knock on the door, and this lady said, I think she's ready to have the baby. I was like, okay. So I had to compose myself, you know, and went on and helped her with her baby. Now that was in May, and then the second one, she went into labor in June, and since then, that daughter, I've delivered some of her children, so I'm doing second-generation babies as well. And then the word just kind of got around in the community, and then finally, I don't know, I tell people like around September or October, Nasra decided to get back on board, and she invited me into midwifery, and for 4 years I continued to train with her until she kicked me out the nest and said, you're ready, go on your own now. And so it came in stages like that, first as a whisper, as a telling, and then as it unfolded, and 37 years later, here I am. Oh, yeah.
That's a tough act to follow. I think, is mine on?
Tap it.
Yes,
Can you all hear me?
yes,
Okay. Well, my story is not nearly as magical. It's not, I can't compete. But for me, at the age of 13, I remember when you are ready to graduate from middle school to high school, and they say, well, what do you want to do when you grow up? And I said, you know, I wanted to help women have babies. And I was told, oh, you want to be an obstetrician. So for an extended period of time, I kept that in the forefront of my mind. And the more I learned of what an obstetrician was, it just did not resonate with me when I learned that they cut on women, and I couldn't see myself doing that. I went to nursing school twice and dropped out twice because I began to realize more and more that I did not want to work in a hospital. The idea of midwifery was not presented to me until my second child, my second pregnancy, and she's 16. So I just was horribly upset when I learned I was pregnant, and primarily because I just did not want to go to the hospital again, because my first experience wasn't one that I treasured. It was, cascade of OB intervention. And as a matter of fact, her father suggested a midwife. I had never even heard of it before. And so I began my research. At that time, I was living in South Carolina with Lisa Amon. She's a still practicing midwife there now, and I started to study under her initially. So I've been on and off the horse. I would honestly say that was the calling for me when I first learned of what a midwife is and what she does compared to hospital midwives. So I just fell in love with it. I did. I went through the whole fantasy of it, and this profession, I really will tell you, it'll snap you out of fantasy land very quickly, because there is nothing fantasious about being a midwife. But I'll keep it short. That's really my story.
Okay, well, since we're talking about your your training, could you explain what a doula is? Because a lot of people are confused between what a doula and a midwife is.
Certainly. Honestly, doula work is how I segued into midwifery fully. And that was with the birth of my last child. That was in '06, and that's when I became a doula. So a doula is, she's trained in support. She doesn't do anything medical. Sometimes when people ask me, what is a doula, I say it's easier to tell you what a doula isn't than to tell you what she does, because she does very much what your mother would do. She mothers you throughout that laboring process, but she's not down there giving you vaginal exams. She's not listening to heart tones. She's not doing anything medical. Her whole premise is physical support and helping you assume different positions, emotional support, letting you know that you're doing a really good job, informational support. I think that's the biggest component of a doula. She helps to eliminate the fear cycle by empowering the families with just information throughout that laboring birth process.
Okay, thank you. Salaamah, could you hold your applause till the end of the program so we can go on and get, yeah. Salaamah, why would a woman choose a home birth as opposed to having a baby in a hospital? What would you think, what would you consider be the more positive aspects of home births as opposed to hospital births?
Well, doctors in hospitals are really wonderful if you need them. Doctors, medical people, their training is in pathology, which is everything that can go wrong. And so if you're looking for a problem, you're a whole lot more likely to see a problem. If that's what all of your training is, then you're looking at things and saying, is this a problem? Is that a problem? Could this possibly be a problem? And birth is a normal, natural bodily function. And what midwives do is they are the experts in normal. And normal has wide varieties. Just like any bell curve, you have a whole bunch of people in the middle, and then you have outliers, but they're also normal. And so also, hospitals are places for sick people. And everybody who comes through your room while you're in the hospital is dragging some germs from all the places that they were before. If it's the lady that's mopping the floor, the guy that's dumping the trash, the nurses, the doctors. And if you are infected with germs that live in a hospital, they're a booger bear to get rid of. I mean, they live with antibiotics and antiseptics, and they're quote-unquote resistant. So for a normal, natural bodily process like birth, your safest place is home in your house, where you have antibodies against all the germs that live in your house. You pass those on to your baby. Trying to think, I had about 10 different things in my head, but they all left when I looked out and looked at all of you.
Okay.
Yes, you feel safe in your house. You are in charge in your house. We come to your house as guests, and we work for you. In the hospital, doctors and nurses are in charge, and you don't get a whole lot to say. You know, these are the rules, and you either do that or move on. You can always sign yourself out. So, let's see what else.
Okay.
Add.
Do you,
I can add
do you want to add to that?
Yeah.
Ms. Waller?
There's a French obstetrician named Michel Audant who has done research on birth, and he did a comparison of women who gave birth in the hospital and women who give birth at home. And the women who gave birth in the hospital run into more complications because of interventions such as, and this is his theory, if you take a woman outside of her comfort zone, out of her natural environment, home, and in labor, and you take her to an unfamiliar location, hospital, where she's bombarded by people who she's never seen before, anesthesiologists, labor and delivery nurses, people there to take your vitals, people who are there asking you questions to fill out. They just come in randomly, where you have bright lights that are beaming on you. Remember, back in the days, they used to call an operating room a theater, so you have bright lights that are on you, and the temperature is very cold because it is a hospital, and hospitals keep the temperature cold to keep germs down. She's liable to want to have an epidural just to anesthetize all of the external stimuli that's going on around her that she has no control over. You have a woman who stays in her familiar environment at home, where she has continuity of care with a midwife who's seen her throughout her entire pregnancy. She has people in her room or her home who love her, support her, who's got her back, where she can control the temperature in her home, where she can also control the lighting in her home. She's more prone to have a normal and a natural delivery compared to the woman who has her baby in the hospital. When I hear of almost all the stories of women who've had hospital births, they all have the same story. You go, you have your last prenatal visit. If you haven't delivered by this date, you're going to get induced. So they already sabotage the mind of the mom that her body might not work, okay? If she doesn't reach her due date, then she comes in and she gets an induction, okay? The chemicals that is used to bring on contractions is a lot more violent and stronger and harder to cope with, to the point where women do beg for an epidural. And then before you know it, if you have a mom that has never taken drugs before, and then she has all this going into her system, they say that we're going to have to do a C-section because of fetal distress. But, you know, let's just make it real. The baby's ODing and needs to get out now before it drops. And so off she goes to the emergency room and has an emergency C-section. And so just to keep birth normal, just to, like in the beginning of my days when I was delivering babies earlier on, we would get the revolutionary, the people who were part of the spiritual community, the Birkenstock granola crunchy folks that had their babies at home. Today, I've watched, and you probably would agree also, now I'm getting anybody and everybody, okay? Even people that eat pork, and people back in the days didn't eat pork if they were having a home. They were usually like vegetarians and real, but there's anybody, and the reason why you have your ordinary folks that are choosing to have the baby at home is so they can avoid having a C-section and avoid being bullied in the labor rooms.
And you can't tell me that 1 out of 3 women can't have a baby. I mean, the woman's body is made to give birth. Certain hormones melt your solid flesh, and it stretches beyond belief, and then it snaps back, and you have a baby.
And you forget what it felt like, and you have another one.
There's something called the fear, tension, pain cycle, okay? So if you're afraid, then it's like, oh God, here comes another one. You tense up against that fear. And if you tense up, you got one set of muscles that's trying to open up to let the baby out, and then you have another set that clamps down on top. So it makes it hurt more and do less.
Last longer.
And if you're fearful or worried or frightened, then the fight or flight hormone, adrenaline, is released into your body. That's the chemical that allows mothers to lift cars up if that car is on their child, or that's what happens when you fighting for your life. And that's a signal to your body that you're not in a safe place for this new life, this new vulnerable life to come out. So your body will shut down that labor. It'll slow it down and stop it in some circumstances to give you a chance to get where you're safe. Well, that's also called failure to progress, which is the #1 diagnosis for a C-section. So we gotta think, we can't keep taking our most vulnerable citizens to the enemy, because we the ones that gotta live with what we get back.
Okay, Sarahn, could you talk a little bit more about the high maternal mortality rate and the infant mortality rate?
I think Sekesa
Or
came prepared to
Sekesa.
talk about that.
Okay.
In Georgia, yeah, specifically.
Right.
Yeah.
So as many of us know that the infant and maternal mortality rates here in Georgia, in the United States periods, is very high. I'm sure you're familiar with some of the different campaigns and things in the media, but Georgia right now is the highest in the nation for
#1.
maternal mortality. Our infant mortality rate is really bad as well. Neither one of them are good. We were looking at some numbers. It can be challenging to find up-to-date exact numbers. I even found a website that specifically said it can be challenging to find specific numbers. And as you do more research, you see why epidemiology is a science within itself, because it can be very challenging. But what I was able to find, to give you some exact figures, as of 2014, if you look at the maternal mortality rate, Black women are dying at 49 per every 100,000, versus white women are dying only at 14 per 100,000. Okay, and then as far as our babies are concerned, I thought that was a little tricky. When you look at the numbers for infant mortality, they always place it in a ratio of 1,000. And I was saying that's to kind of thin it out so it doesn't sound so scary. When you look at the maternal mortality, they put it in figures of 100,000. So when you do the math, basically, infant mortality for white women as of 2014, they said were 5.5 per every 1,000. If you put that in a 100,000 ratio, that's 550 per 100,000. For us, Black women, you're looking at 13.3 our babies, per 1,000. If you put that in figures of 100,000, that's 1,330 babies per every 100,000 are dying. That's pretty bad.
So what is considered the contributing factor for infant and maternal mortality rates?
Where when you're looking at the maternal mortality rate, you're looking at, they look at between 42 days postpartum and the first year. So within that 42 days postpartum, you have the greater numbers, and the greatest risk is hemorrhage. For our babies, it's still prematurity. That seems to be the highest ranking for our babies as far as our our infant mortality rate.
So is environment, diet, what is
Oh, yes.
the contributing factor towards the infant and the maternal? What are the...
Definitely, for both. As Mama Sarahn says all the time, nutrition. Nutrition is the key. She explains, and you can elaborate on that, how some of the granny midwives, when you talk about nutrition, they talk about a garden. And this is how you should have your garden, and this is what should be in your garden, because the foundation, even then, was nutrition. So even though a lot of people have access to food stamps, they don't have access to quality information for sound nutrition during that pregnancy. Yeah, they really don't. So you don't pass that on to your babies. They don't pass that on, and it's just generational.
Okay, you want to add
It's a
something?
It
multi-level,
is.
there's a lot of things that go into the infant and maternal mortality rates. And I think personally that a lot of it involves the stress of being black in white America, because when you look at the maternal mortality rate, it doesn't change no matter how much education you have, no matter how much money you make. We're still dying. And so it can't just be poverty. It's got to be stress, basically. I remember my mother told me that whatever you do, you got to be twice as good, to get any kind of chance at all. And so even if you're a lawyer or you're a doctor or you're an executive in some business, you still have to be there, show up, not go when you don't feel good, go when you're stressed, miss meals, because you got to keep your work up to date, or and so one of the things that the grand midwives did, and that's what they wanted to be called, they told us, not granny, but grand midwives. One of the things that they did was that they took very good care of the women. Sometimes they even fed them. They said, well, honey, come by and get a couple of eggs every other day. Make sure you eat them. Don't give them to the kids now. So we now we're living, we don't have our families. We've moved all over the country. We don't have our communities. And I think that this nuclear family is unfair to women, because one woman has got to be all things, everybody in that house. You got to wash all the clothes, cook all the food, move all the dust. We need to help each other. I mean, we are really herd animals. We are, we're meant to be tribal. We're meant to be, to help each other out. You cook today, I'll cook tomorrow. And I think that that's part of what we're missing too, is that we're totally stressed.
You have
Can I
anything
add to that? There's a documentary that came out, I think it was in 2010, called When the Bough Breaks, and they explained it exactly how you just said it. They were trying to reach an understanding as to why the African-American female child is born with heightened cortisol levels. Why is she a survivor in a NICU? And if of any other race of child that was born and goes to the NICU, they say the African-American female child has the greatest rate of survival. So the study started there, and what they found was that we are born with the enhanced or heightened cortisol levels. We're born stressed out. And what was so deep about it to me was when they studied immigrant women that came from the Caribbean, or they came from Africa, or they came from South America, the second generation in that bloodline, she would have the same results. The mama didn't. The new immigrant that came here and delivered, her outcomes were fine. Her babies didn't have those enhanced or those heightened cortisol levels. But her daughters and all of her female lineage from there forward would represent the same numbers. So you're absolutely right. And the core of it, toward the end of the documentary, they say is racism. It is.
Sarahn, do you want to add something to what?
Well, I just had an interesting conversation with one of my mothers today, and I've had several of them also, where when we talk about low birth weight and we talk about prematurity, I tend to believe that the reason why we have these premature babies is because, now this is my thinking, is that the babies are figuring if they can't get anything to eat while they're inside, then if I be born now, then I'll be in my mommy's face and she will feed me. And so one of my moms is probably going to risk out of my care this weekend because she too is carrying a very small baby. It's very concerning to me. And I told her that was very concerning to me when I saw her last week. But the response that I get is, well, my mother said that I was 4 pounds and 7 ounces when I was born. And my husband was just 5 pounds. Well, see, now we're continuing generations of the same eating habits, the same stress levels. And, you know, I'm always like, look, let's get the babies up to 6 pounds at least. 7 pounds, 8 pounds, a bigger baby thrives a lot better than a lower weight baby. And so education, I'm going back to the education. All of what we're saying is valid. That we have so many layers to the existing mortality rates with infants and with mothers. But a lot of it does have to do with education. Education at the most common level. I tell people that before there were doulas and childbirth educators, the childbirth educators and the doulas were the
Midwives.
and the mothers, the grandmothers, the aunties, the ladies at the church, the ladies that you saw at the general store. If you were rocking on your front porch, the ladies that walk by and want to give you some word of advice or give you the to-dos and not to-dos, the taboos and what to eat and what not to eat. And so we had more of that in our community, more communication, more education, more support. When you saw on Bringin in the Spirit, when they start funneling black women into hospitals and poor white women into hospitals, then they started doing experimentations. Women were delivering babies under twilight or either spinal blocks, epidural. So then we have now 2 and 3 generations of mothers who don't know how to support their young daughters now because their pregnancy and their birth experiences have been anesthetized. And as Salaamah says, a lot of us are transplants. We've moved away from home, either to go to college and stayed somewhere else. So we don't have the support of our families. And so fortunately, we do have a new profession that has just begun. When Nasra and I first started doing doula work, that was before the word even doula was heard. We're just supporting each other. This sister right here, Omelika and Nasra and maybe a few other people, we created our own family, we created extended family, and we learned from each other about our pregnancies. And when it came down to birth, we knew who to call. I would think of all my favorite friends who cooked the best. and call them up and gave them Monday, gave them Tuesday, gave them Wednesday, so that when my husband went back to work, then I can count on my sister friends coming at lunchtime and bringing enough food for me to eat for lunch and to have leftovers for my family to eat when they came home from school and to work. So the profession of doulas, the profession of midwives, labor doulas, postpartum doulas has grown, and it needs to grow anymore. At one point in time, when I would do my research on the African American midwife, I did a lot of my research at the Department of Archives. That was that big old marble glass, block building that was by the government buildings. It's moved down into Morrow now. And at one point, there were 4,000 grand midwives that served all over Georgia. Well, it had to be, because that was before there were highways and byways. You served the area that you can walk to, even in the snow and in the sleet, or you can get on your buggy and get to them. So it wasn't like I'm going down to Macon to go deliver a baby. I can't walk that far, right? We need to increase those numbers. It's going to be us. We are the ones that we've been waiting for. It's going to take more and more women to educate themselves about diet, about nutrition, about prenatal care, about pregnancy, about birth, becoming doulas. I want to create a challenge. Let's have 4,000 doulas in 2000. We'll pick out a year. 2020. 2020. 4,000 by 2020. So that we can, because I've always been a believer that the whole elimination of the midwife program, that was a deliberate, intentional program, did a disservice to our community. And I believe that we can collectively, along with legislators like April Mabel and other community workers, and make some changes, because we rank the highest. If you heard her, we rank the highest. Georgia ranks the highest in maternal mortality on the delivery bed, and that's not acceptable. And while they were doing this elimination of the midwife, Georgia ranked, well, when I first came into midwifery in 1980, Georgia ranked in the top 5 of infant mortality. So, okay, let's watch and see if their programs work and see if it changes. And it hasn't changed. It's gotten worse. And today, we still rank in the top 4 of infant mortality.
Okay, so let's wrap it up. Can I get a brief final statement that the main thing you want people to understand and leave with about midwives, midwifery, doula? Very brief. Just tell everybody what is the last thing you want them to hear from you about your profession and your passion?
I would like to say that you can't grow a baby on Coca-Cola and potato chips. If you're going to provide a vehicle that this child's soul is going to live in for the rest of its life, you want a good foundation, just like you're building a house. You want bricks and wood and nails and glass and screws and windows and doors, and this baby starts out as one single cell that you can't even see. Half of it from the mother, half of it from the father, and 9 months later you got a whole human being. Eyes, ears, nose, heart, lungs, kidneys, toenails, eyelashes. And they don't come here with their leg hanging off the back of their head. I mean, they follow the pattern. This one cell knows how to do all of these things, and it's constantly doubling. And so this baby has got to grow to live. And if you're not feeding it good, solid building blocks to build the body, it's got to come out and take its chances on the outside. So encourage the pregnant ladies that you know to eat enough. They're not getting fat, okay?
I would like for you all to go away with this thought. Right now, I feel like we're preaching to the choir, because you all know. You know, a lot of you all know. There might be some newbies here, but there's a lot of sisters that Fulton County, DeKalb County, and Gwinnett County has the highest rates that we're talking about in all of Georgia. And I would like to challenge you to encourage someone else to become a doula, because home birth is really for the low-risk moms, okay? There's a lot of these moms that we're talking about, teenage moms included, who don't know what to eat. They don't know how to take care. They don't know the importance of going to prenatal care. They don't go to prenatal care a lot of the times. These are the ones who we have to touch, okay? It's fine and good for us to encourage the sisters that are part of the choir also to have, home births and whatnot. But the ones that are being affected the most are the ones that you probably see on the bus and you don't really talk to very much or at all. Those are the ones whose lives that we need to touch. When I say that we do need to increase our numbers of doulas, we do. Because you all are the in-between person to help advocate for this mother and also be an advocate for her in the hospital. But let's go, we got to bust out of our bubble and reach out to those sisters and brothers who really need the information so they can be empowered. Empowerment comes through education, through knowledge. We need childbirth educators, too. More childbirth educators.
Well, thank you, Sarahn. Ms. Sekesa.
I just want to piggyback off of what Mama Sarahn said. Yes, we definitely need more doulas. Whatever pathway that you're on, we need more midwives as well. So there are many pathways to midwifery. If that is in your heart and you feel like that is your calling, then answer the call. As Mama Sarahn said, and you saw in the documentary, we had over 4,000 midwives at one time in Georgia, over 5,000 in Mississippi. So we are here. Those spirits are here. They are returning, and I think we all that feel the call, that feel a need to answer the call, then do so. Again, there's so many pathways to becoming a midwife, and at the end of that pathway, we are all standing strong as midwives. So, come on, join your sisterhood.
Okay, well, thank you very much. I would like to thank Umm Salaamah, Sarahn, and Sekesa for coming out and sharing the film Bringing in the Spirit. I hope you all come back out to Auburn Avenue Research Library. We have another program tomorrow. It's called When Black Lives Matter. This is a continuation of Women's History Month, and we'll be talking about the different situations that have occurred and how they impact black women and black men. We also have Bitter Fruit is a play. That'll be here Saturday. And on Sunday, we'll have some Brazilian music. So, check out our webpage, Facebook, our Auburn Avenue webpage, and thank you all for coming.